All right, let's have a look at it's Kieran in the Bush, the new high rating radio show, Kieran in the Bush, on breakfast this morning, and they're going to start with a conversation around. And I'm actually a little bit disappointed that we didn't get to the conflict of interest conversation, because they are going to talk about, with no CGT, with a reduced Brightline test. Our Prime Minister has just received hundreds of thousands of dollars tax-free. I think he received more in the last week or a bit than he gets in a salary. But for his salary, he pays tax. But for the profit he made on the houses, yeah, that's just a freebie. That's basically a lotto win. Let's have a listen to what these two blokes had to say.
Cutbacks and savings versus the rich getting richer. The Prime Minister even said, "I'm wealthy and I'm sorted." Does that?
That would be the most tone-deaf thing this Prime Minister has ever said, ever.
Yep.
That seem fair?
Well, does what seem fair? I mean, there are wealthy people in this country, and I want all New Zealanders to be wealthier than they are. That's the main reason I'm in politics, and the main reason I think all MPs go into politics, actually, is to make New Zealand a wealthier, more prosperous place. The question is whether or not a capital gains tax will do that, and the answer is no. A capital gains tax is a tax on savings and investment. That is what New Zealand needs more of. We need more savings, we need more investment, we want more capital flowing into the economy, and we want productive investment.
So that implies that this money that the Prime Minister has just made is going to flow into the economy. I suggest it's going to flow into a stock market portfolio or into a savings account. I don't suspect it's going to flow into the economy. So there's this red herring going up about more capital, thinking that your landlords, your property investors, your mom and pop landlords are going to get those earnings and drive them into another business. I don't think that's the case when it comes to this, which is why if you make $200,000 on a house, you should be treated very similarly to if you earn $200,000 from a business. I just think it's as simple as that. That's what I think, at least.
That is what a capital gains tax goes against, and so we are opposed to a capital gains tax. They're also extremely complex, by the way, which is why.
Also a red herring, Whānau, because if it's so hard to put in place, how do all the other countries do it? We got told yesterday by these guys, look at what Australia is doing with this and this and this. They wouldn't talk about what Australia is doing with things like capital gains tax, though, would they? Because that's a less convenient conversation for them.
Every time governments have looked at introducing them in the past, they actually ultimately haven't done so in the end, because in the end you end up taxing KiwiSaver, potentially end up taxing family batches, jewellery, art, and small business.
Sorry, this is like the trio of red herrings. You can just stipulate in law what it's going to be. He's basically saying, well, it could be this and it could be that and it could be that, and legislation can just dictate exactly what it is. Family. I mean, I don't have a problem with CGT on family batches, second properties, third properties, but if you wanted to, you could say family homes and one more, and then every other one gets it done. So it's red herring again. He's almost going, if we did a capital gains tax, we'd have no control as to what we taxed. It's like, well, you write the legislation, so you have all the control.
Businesses. And so ultimately, the last thing New Zealand needs right now is another tax. We need to grow the economy, and you can't tax your way out of a recession.
Kieran, is the Prime Minister being treated unfairly?
No, of course he's not. I mean, he's rallied against the idea of a capital gains tax and then sells 2 of his 7 properties, makes almost $500,000 in profit and doesn't pay a cent in tax, whereas every single worker in this country pays tax on every cent they earn. It's quite clear that the taxation system in this country is unfair. And when you've got the PM rallying against something that would have made him pay tax on those sales, of course people are going to be asking questions. Of course they want to have a discussion about that, whether it's right and whether it's fair, and whether it is something that people are comfortable with when you have a Prime Minister who's declaring himself wealthy and sorted, making profits that are actually going to be higher than many people's KiwiSaver accounts when they retire.
Yep.
Yet they've all paid tax on that money.
Yep.
So I think it's a fair discussion.
It's actually a really fair question, Emily. It's like, should we pay tax on money we earn or make? If the answer is yes, capital gains tax is what should be. If the answer is no, then a whole bunch of us are paying a whole bunch of tax we shouldn't be paying. I mean, this has got a couple of minutes to go, but what do you think so far, Emily?
The argument of, like, you shouldn't be going after him, like where we're going unfairly against Chris Luxon is really annoying because he's the Prime Minister, sure, so he gets a spotlight on him, but he is reflective of so many Kiwis out there who are flipping property and making hundreds of thousands in gains and not paying anything. And the other thing too is, like, I think someone said that he would only be paying 70,000 into the tax pool, which isn't that much. He still gets a buttload of money for that.
Yeah.
And it's 70,000, which is not that much. But if you duplicate that for 10, 20 people, that's a lot of money. It's almost $1 million that would be going back into, $1 million. That'll be going back into the economy, which is much better than it just floating between rich people who are flipping houses between each other.
Yeah, and the kind of red herring that Chris Bishop is doing, this kind of, your jewelry is going to be taxed next, like that, when no one ever anywhere in this country, right? Yeah. And within legislation, like, oh my gosh, how can we set it to 50 kilometers per hour? They could drive any speed. Well, you write in the legislation 50 km/h. You write it in. So you write in, not the family home, or you write in the family home is clear plus one other. And then after, so it's just, it's almost I think treating people like they're just freaking idiots. It's like I don't think people have the money literacy to be able to discern that too. So when they say they're coming after your KiwiSaver, people are going to go, "Oh no, my KiwiSaver," but you already get tax interest. Don't you get tax on the interest with the KiwiSaver as well? Yeah, earnings.
Yeah, so anything you earn in terms of interest on that, you're already getting taxed on it.
You got savings in the bank that earns interest. You pay tax on that. So there will be tax on this. Let's say 500,000. That's the number Kieran used. There could be tax on it if he puts it into the bank and that starts earning interest. But actually, that's sort of a secondary issue to what it is, because if I am a salaried worker and I pay PAYE and then I save some of that and that starts to accrue interest, that gets taxed as well. So you're still missing out that initial taxation of the thing you've earned or made on that thing. So,
and you make more money with the money that you've got too. Money makes money. So if you've got more in the bank, you just make more and more of it compared to what you can make with tiny $100 savings.
And remember, right, this Prime Minister was very keen when Labour was in to make the point that an appearance of a conflict of interest was basically as bad as a conflict of interest. Remember he said this?
Well, for the very reason that it actually leads to perceptions of bias, rightly or wrongly. I just say to you, that's the perception. Whether that's real or not doesn't really matter.
So if there's a perception of something, it doesn't actually matter if it's real or not, from the guys who cancelled the Brightline test, made it lower, which enabled him to sell this house and get tax-free hundreds of thousands of dollars. Is there a perception there of bias, a perception of a conflict of interest? I would say yes. And according to pre-election Christopher Luxon, that's as bad as if there actually is bias or a conflict of interest. So we'll keep going. If I can find my mouse. There it is.
There you go, Chris. What have you got to say? Labour's criticism is he's got skin in the game. He's just made $500,000 thanks to capital gains tax.
Well, look, I think it's really... We shouldn't be making tax policy on the basis of the Prime Minister's personal situation. That, let's be honest about it, that's not a very good way to make tax law. And this whole discussion is pretty facile.
But also, it's not a good way to defend tax law by saying because this one individual, because as Emily has said, this could be replicated hundreds, if not thousands of times across the country. He may be emblematic of a much bigger issue, even though we're talking about one person, who is also changing laws to enable him to then get that money tax-free, whereas under Labour, the Brightline was longer and he would not have got it. So yes, I think it is worth talking about him.
Of that, we should be making tax policy on the basis of what's best for the economy and what's best to get out of the recession that we are in right now.
Agreed.
And how do we create a more prosperous New Zealand? And we remain opposed to a capital gains tax. The Prime Minister has never hid the fact that he is wealthy. He has done well in life. He started off, living down in Christchurch and was the first in his family to go to university. He's become successful in business. He's now entered politics.
Sheesh, bit of a fanboy here, Mr. Bishop. You maybe want to just lower the volume on the bootlicking. Good
It
grief.
sounds like
Everyone
JD
knows all
Vance.
that. So let's stop talking about whether or not the Prime Minister owns a property or not, he sold it and made a gain or not, and let's start talking about the real issues facing New Zealand, eh?
Well, if we want to talk about the real
fuck,
issues,
mate, it
let's
is.
not try and paint this into something that it's not. No one's trying to develop tax policy, and we're not just talking about this or as a result of this discussion. No one's having this discussion out of the blue. This has been a long-ranging topic in this country, and it's come into the public sphere because the Prime Minister has sold 2 of his 7 properties and made $500,000 and hasn't paid tax. Now, it's entirely fair to have that discussion on the basis of that. MPs and ministers are required to declare their interests every single year so that people know whether or not there is any conflict of interest. And if someone is rallying against the idea of a capital gains tax, then makes profit without paying tax when everybody else pays tax, that is a fair yarn to have.
There you go. As Kieran always says, a fair yarn to have. Emily, I saw you pulling out your hair there. Would you like to take over, please?
It's this whole idea of it's not something that's of importance to New Zealand when flipping property is kind of the only way to actually get ahead in the country. But in order to invest in property, you kind of need to have money, which not a lot of people do. And it's just getting way and way harder to actually buy a house. I know, because I haven't been able to buy a house. But it just really annoys me. I don't know. I think this whole thing he's emblematic of a wider issue. A week ago, we had, the ANZ CEO saying probably should do it.
Yeah, about time.
So it's not exactly like it's come out of nowhere. And I also think it's a dumb thing for Christopher Luxon to do this while he's the Prime Minister, because it's just highlighting the problem. If he was it's not like he has to sell it right this minute, but he should have held on to it. It wouldn't have been an issue. It might have worked in his favour.
Yeah, we often think about the optics. I mean, you're a person who's obviously well versed in wrapping up a package with the bow, metaphorically speaking, with the marketing type design ideas, and the optics of what these guys do. Sometimes really unwise. I agree. Like if he had kept them for another 2 years or whatever it's going to be, and if they lose, which is odds are they won't, but if they did, and he goes back to being a citizen and he sells them then for more profit, because here's the flip side to it. I'm a wealthy guy. I'm taken care of means you don't actually need to sell it. Like you don't need to sell it. You just want to sell it.
Yeah. Do we know why I mean, that's probably his personal reasons, but do we know why he sold it? Like, was it a rental property? Was it just a batch?
One of them was the apartment he was living in
owned?
Wellington, and he was moving into Premier House, so he sold it. So he didn't need it. But what I'm saying is, like if I was in a position like you, for example, and I wanted to get into another property, I could flip one and then get into another property. He doesn't need to do that. He doesn't need the money in his hand because he's doing something else. So just again, the optics around someone who's not quite, I don't want to say smart enough, but wise enough is probably better to go, this is not going to be a good look. You are writing Labour's adverts at the next election already. Like you're helping the situation. It's just it makes me feel like he is more naive than he should be at this level of politics, Yeah.
Yeah. He's definitely not a politician. Someone like the Bish, that's nice. The Bish is a politician. He knows how to spin things. Nicola Willis, politician, knows how to spin things. They all know how to spin stuff. He doesn't know how to do it. His PR team are very good at writing him, say this, don't go off script. And it's so obvious when you hear it over and over and over again, he doesn't answer the question. And he's not good at spinning a narrative like most politicians are, which doesn't work in his favor. And it's kind of like the Trump thing, right? You look at Trump and he's saying cats and dogs stuff on TV, and then you see JD Vance, who's saying pretty much the same stuff, but he's a trained politician. So it goes over the heads of most people.
Yep.
And they go, oh, that sounds like that does sound like a good idea. Whereas they might look at, someone else and go, not so much. But
that's where
he just hasn't learned the game yet.
This is where you need journalists and people like us to go. Even though the Bish sounds like he knows what he's talking about, just let's figure out what he's saying. They're not coming for your jewelry. They're not coming for your art. It sounds scary. He's done that well. That sounds scary. But this is it's not. We're talking about for houses, potentially your family home. That's how it happens around the world, potentially. But other places, investment, if you own more than 2 properties, if you own more than 3 properties, actually going after the people who are using this as an income, because that's the other thing. If you are using this for an income, a property developer is using this for an income. You know, perhaps, like I've always sort of been of the opinion that before we had KiwiSaver, there were a lot of people in New Zealand who would buy a second house and that was their retirement scheme. Like they knew there wasn't much there other than the pension. They wanted something else. So they bought a house when they were 40 and rented it out for 20 years. It paid for it. And that was it. Like I feel more compassionate and empathy towards them because they were living in a system where there wasn't the backup that there is now. And so if they were going to do the CGT thing, I think they could do it starting from a particular date, meaning people, maybe people who have bought houses before KiwiSaver, whenever that date is, maybe they're excluded because they probably bought it so they could retire. And maybe there'd be ways around it. But the people who are buying and flipping or developing and selling, then that's their job. You know, the person working at the dairy, his job or her job gets taxed. If you are a property developer, that's your job. That profit should be taxed. And I don't think that would be that hard to define in law. You know, what a property developer is versus someone saving who's got a house for their retirement. I don't think it would be that hard.
But like Labour have said and other people have said, they're not coming after you, the mum and dads, which they like to use, like the mum and dad property investors. Which, to be fair, I think you could leave them out of it because I think they are, like my landlord, for example, is great. He's doing a genuine service.
Yep.
I'm not a huge fan of him, but he is providing a service. He's reasonable. He's a good guy, and like he only owns his home in the one we're living in. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of those, which is great. It's the ones who own more than 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the numbers are crazy. I think I looked it up just to check, but just an insane number of people, or a very small number of people, own an insane number of properties, and it's pretty crazy.
But I think it's as simple as that. If this is your job, right, then you pay tax on the money you earn at your job. There would be a way of defining that. There may be some grey area in between they'd have to figure out, but it wouldn't be that difficult.